My wife told me that she would never get pregnant or have a child for anyone, but when I got home, I found out she was already a month pregnant. I had just returned from a 2-month business trip. Fernando, listen to me carefully. I, Julia, have no intention of having children because no man is worth the pain of carrying a child for 10 months, Julia told me during a company dinner. After leaving the event, amid the awkward stares of others, I returned home, only to find a package. Julia's pregnancy report. She was already 1 month pregnant, and I had just come back from a 2-month trip. Despite this deep betrayal, I felt an unexpected relief. I calmly called Julia and said, "Let's find a time to get divorced." "Fernando, what are you talking about? Just because I won't have children for you, you want to divorce me?" Her voice dripped with contempt. "Julia, look at this baby sock. Shouldn't we buy this for our child?" A soft male voice intervened. It was Miguel, her childhood friend. The call ended abruptly. I looked at the house I had considered my home for 7 years and sighed deeply. This house was bought before our marriage, but now it felt tainted. I decided to move out and sell it. As I packed my things, the door opened. Julia walked in with Miguel by her side. "Fernando, where are the slippers? Miguel is cold. Can you get him a pair?" Julia ordered me, as usual. Miguel wore a smug smile, his eyes mocking me as he spoke softly. "Fernando, can you help us?" I shoved my design sketches into the suitcase without responding or even looking at them. The presence of both of them made me nauseous, like being drunk and then entering a car full of sickly perfume. "Are you deaf?" Julia yelled, throwing one of her high heels in my direction. I dodged it and gave her a cold look, but chose silence. Noticing my suitcase for the first time, she frowned and asked, "What's going on?" "I told you on the phone, divorce," I answered flatly. Despite having loved her deeply once, the disappointment had piled up until the love disappeared in an instant. "Fernando, you're throwing a tantrum. I've already told you before, I don't like women." "Julia is just my best friend," added Miguel, mockingly. "Let's make up, please. Don't be upset. I'll try not to bother you anymore." "Julia, Miguel, what you did wrong is Fernando's jealousy, which is causing all this trouble. It has nothing to do with you, and he's upset just because I won't give him children." Julia threw me a look of disdain. "If I knew you'd react this way, I wouldn't have married you." "It's not too late to leave," I replied as I closed my suitcase and checked my drawing equipment before walking out the door. "I'll list the house with a realtor. You should hurry up and move out." "You're going to sell our house?" Julia suddenly screamed. She grabbed my arm. "Fernando, I'm just refusing to have children. Does that really warrant a divorce? We agreed you wouldn't pressure me about this. You brought this up in front of everyone today. I only said what I think. Don't touch me." "You're filthy," I retorted as I shook off her grip. "Filthy?" Julia shot back incredulously. "You've lost your mind, Fernando." Her anger was growing, as it always did when my blatant disdain for her became unbearable. "That's not the case," I replied. "And it was Enrique who mentioned the child today, not me. But even if it were me, you should have supported me in front of others. Instead, you didn't. Do you think I'm that unworthy? Who doesn't know you and Enrique are close? He was just speaking for you. What dignity do you think you need? I'm the president of the company. It's because I'm your wife that you have any status. Once we divorce, what will you have?" Her expression was full of mockery as she looked at me. I fell silent, struggling to understand how she could say such things. Seeing my silence, Julia thought she had cornered me. She pointed at me and said, "Now, apologize to Miguel immediately, or I won't forgive you. Fernando loves you so much, it's normal for him to be jealous. He doesn't need to apologize." Miguel interjected in a tone that seemed understanding but was full of provocation and arrogance. "Did you hear that, Fernando? Miguel is so kind and generous, while you're always so petty." Julia mocked. "If Miguel weren't gay, maybe I wouldn't have chosen you, because you've been a disappointment." When I stayed silent, Miguel added condescendingly, "All right, Julia, don't be so harsh on Fernando. Here's what I'll do. I'll apologize to him. If he's still not satisfied, I'll even kneel and apologize." To my surprise, he really knelt in front of me. "Fernando, it was all my fault," he said through tears. "Although I don't like women, I'm still a man in the eyes of others. Being close to Julia must make you feel ashamed. That was my fault, Fernando. I sincerely apologize now and promise to cut ties with Julia." Julia's anger only intensified with this scene. She slapped me across the face without warning. I casually pushed her hand away and looked at them coldly. How could she betray me and still have the audacity to strike me? "How dare you slap me?" she exclaimed, disbelief on her face. I silently stared at her and said, "Julia, I've been away on a business trip for 2 months while you're 1 month pregnant with someone else's child. I really want to know where you get the audacity to yell at me like that." As I spoke, I threw the pregnancy report in her face. Her expression paled instantly, and panic filled her eyes. But in the blink of an eye, her expression hardened. "Fernando, I'm your wife. How dare you investigate me? Don't you trust me? You're pregnant with another man's child, and you can still say that? You really are something," I replied, unable to stop myself from laughing in disbelief. "And just so you know, I never investigated you. This pregnancy report just arrived by mail," I explained. Miguel shouted, "Julia, maybe I put the wrong address. That's why Fernando is angry. It's all my fault, not yours. This isn't even a big deal." "He shouldn't be angry over something like this," she retorted, turning her cold gaze back at me. "Fernando, it's your own dirty mind that sees everything as dirty. How could she blame me for being dirty when she was carrying another man's child?" When I discovered I had been betrayed, I felt a mix of anger and an unexpected relief. The truth was, I didn't love her anymore, so her betrayal didn't hurt as much as it could have, but Julia's brazen attitude really irritated me. "So tell me, exactly where am I being dirty?" I asked seriously. Julia snapped back, "The baby in my belly is Miguel's, but we didn't do anything. It was artificial insemination." "So what? So what?" I pressed. "Fernando, you have no compassion. Miguel has been under immense pressure from his family because of his sexual orientation. He wants a child to ease that pressure, and since we grew up together, I feel obligated to help him," she continued with a superior posture. "Would you really like to see Miguel suffer under that pressure?" I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. "Julia, we've been married for years, and you never considered having a child with me. Today, you publicly declared that no man is worth the suffering of carrying a child for 10 months. But here you are, pregnant with another man's child. Where is your dignity?" I asked coldly. Julia glared at me in anger and said, "So you're still upset because I won't have your child? You're so petty. I'm just disappointed in you. Enough. I don't want to waste my time discussing your ridiculous logic." I waved my hand dismissively. "I'll prepare the divorce papers, and you should hurry up and move out." With that, I turned to leave, but Miguel suddenly shouted, "Julia, if you get divorced, our baby will be born into a one-parent family." He clearly expected Julia to use this opportunity to declare that she would marry him, avoiding any discussion about single motherhood. But Julia grabbed my arm, disgust in her eyes, and said, "Fernando, stop making a scene. Did you hear what was said? If we divorce, the baby will be raised without both parents. You can't be that insensitive." "What do you mean by that?" I asked. "Are you suggesting we stay married and raise the child together with Miguel? Do you want to bring her back? Reason. This is unbelievable." Miguel intervened again. "Fernando, you don't need to worry about that. When the baby is born, I'll be around to help take care of it. Then we'll all live happily together as a family of 4. I couldn't help but laugh again in disbelief. "Miguel, you've lost your mind. Julia has no clue. And you think I'm also an idiot? What normal man would allow his wife to carry another man's child?" I mocked, looking away as I walked toward the door. "Fernando, this is so rude. How can you speak like that?" Julia ran after me. I turned to give her a cold look and said, "No nonsense, Julia. We're adults here. Let's maintain some dignity and settle this divorce quickly." Then I approached Miguel. Seeing his pretentious face, I punched him, sending him to the ground with blood streaming from his nose. That punch was a warning. Stay away from me, I warned. If I were you, I'd focus on living with Júlia, the trash, instead of bothering me. When I turned to leave again, Júlia shouted behind me, "Fernando, you've lost your mind. How can you hit someone? And who are you calling trash?" "I'm still your wife," Júlia shouted as she lunged at me. But in a swift move, I slapped her hard enough to send her to the ground. "Listen carefully, Júlia. When I loved you, there were many things I could tolerate, but now that I no longer love you, think carefully about yourself and remember how we got together in the first place." Júlia seemed unable to believe I had really hit her, but when she looked into my eyes and saw my determination, panic flashed across her face. After leaving the house, I drove to the spacious apartment near my office. I had bought this place a while ago but rarely stayed there. After a quick organization, I dove into work. The company was handling a major project, and the plans were in the final stages, needing to be completed urgently. In the past, Júlia might have affected my mood and made it harder to work. However, with her absence, I felt relief. I worked until midnight finalizing the project adjustments. After a few hours of sleep, I went straight to the office. The project was so significant that the final sketch needed to be presented at the board meeting in the conference room. While discussing project issues with the board members, the door was abruptly opened. Júlia entered with Miguel and a dozen security guards. Miguel, dressed in a well-tailored suit, no longer looked effeminate. His face radiated arrogance. "Fernando, you're fired. Get out now." Miguel pointed at me as if I were a dog being shooed away. The silence in the meeting room was almost palpable, interrupted only by Miguel's authoritative voice. "Fernando, you're fired. Get out now," he repeated, pointing at me. Júlia, standing beside him, wore that arrogant smile she was so good at, the smile of someone who believed they had won. I took a deep breath. My initial instinct was to explode, but I knew that would only give them the spectacle they wanted. Instead, I straightened my posture and looked around. The board members were visibly uncomfortable with the direction of the meeting. Some frowned, others whispered among themselves. There were no signs that they agreed with how Miguel and Júlia were handling things. "With all due respect, Júlia," I began, directing my gaze to her and, of course, to Miguel. I paused strategically, letting my words resonate in the room. "I understand that both of you want to humiliate me publicly, but before I leave, I believe I have the right to defend myself and clarify a few things." Júlia rolled her eyes. "Fernando, please, you're not important enough to need an explanation." I didn't respond with a smile, but with a cold stare. "Maybe not to you, but to the company and to the work I've done over the years. I believe my contributions speak for themselves. And, more importantly, I think the board members deserve to know why you're trying to turn a personal problem into something professional." This seemed to grab the board's attention. One of them, Mr. Augusto, who had always remained neutral, raised his hand. "Júlia, I believe Fernando has the right to speak, considering the potential impact this decision could have on the company." Júlia huffed, clearly irritated. "If this is what you want, let him speak. But he's just wasting our time." I ignored the comment and continued, "Over the years, I've dedicated my life to this company. My contributions, as many of you know, have been significant to the growth of important projects. I've never brought personal problems into my work. But, unfortunately, this can't be said about Júlia and Miguel." Miguel tried to interrupt, but I kept going without giving him a chance. "What's happening here has nothing to do with my performance or my professional conduct. This attempt to fire me is a personal retaliation. Júlia is my wife. Or at least she was, until I found out she was pregnant with another man's child while I was away on a work trip. And that man is Miguel." I made sure to look directly at him as I said this. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Some board members seemed surprised, others uncomfortable. "Does this have to do with your professional conduct?" Júlia retorted, trying to compose herself. "You assaulted Miguel in our home. That's unacceptable, in or out of work." "Oh, so that's what this is about?" I asked, feigning surprise. "You're trying to use a personal issue to justify firing me, even when my professional conduct is impeccable. Interesting." Maybe the board members should evaluate who is really stepping outside professional boundaries here. Mr. Augusto intervened again. Julia, is what Fernando is saying true? Is this a personal issue being brought into the corporate sphere? Julia hesitated for the first time. It seemed her confidence was wavering. It doesn't matter. He's a threat to the integrity of the workplace. Besides, Miguel is already preparing a lawsuit against him for homophobia because of the punch he received. Homophobia? I asked, incredulous. Miguel, if you're going to sue me for something, at least be honest. I punched you because you were disrespecting me and my marriage, not because you're gay. I won't tolerate you twisting the facts. The board started whispering again. Some seemed uncomfortable with the mention of a homophobia accusation. Regardless, I continued. The focus should be on the leadership of this company. Julia, as president, you're prioritizing your personal issues over the interests of the company. This isn't just unethical, it's dangerous. Mr. Augusto spoke again. Julia, I'm hearing very concerning things here. I believe the board should seriously discuss your conduct as president. Julia turned red. You can't be serious. I'm the president of this company. Everything I've done has been to protect it. She looked at the security guards, who were present in the room. And bringing security to a board meeting? Trying to fire a respected employee for personal reasons? Does that look like protection to you? Augusto responded. The vote was swift. The majority of the board members decided to remove Julia from the position of president, for the sake of the company. She stormed out of the room, furious, dragging Miguel behind her, who kept throwing angry glances at me. In the following days, Miguel's lawsuit for homophobia was officially filed, but with the evidence I had collected and the witnesses who came forward on my behalf, the case was quickly dismantled. At the same time, I filed a lawsuit against the company for moral damages and attempted retaliation, negotiating a substantial settlement. In the following days, Miguel's lawsuit for homophobia was officially filed, but with the evidence I had collected and the witnesses who came forward on my behalf, the case was quickly dismantled. The court not only rejected the accusations but also pointed out that the attempt to use a personal conflict to defame me was, in itself, an abuse of the judicial system. Miguel left the court humiliated, and the impact of his defeat reverberated both inside and outside the company. Meanwhile, Julia's departure left the presidency vacant, and the company needed someone capable of restoring stability. After weeks of scandals, the board members, aware of my history of contributions and the professional manner in which I handled the situation, began to discuss a definitive solution. It was during an extraordinary board meeting that my life took an unexpected turn. Mr. Augusto, who had shown himself to be my ally from the start, took the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, it's undeniable that Fernando has shown integrity, competence, and commitment to this company, even amidst a storm of personal problems unjustly brought into the workplace. I propose that he be appointed the next president. The proposal was met with nods of approval and praise. Some board members mentioned specific projects I had led and how my conduct, even in the face of adversity, had been exemplary. The vote was unanimous. When my appointment was announced, I was speechless for a few moments. I deeply appreciate the trust you've all placed in me, I said, trying to hold back my emotions. I promise to repay it with dedication and results. I know the recent events have been difficult for everyone, but I am committed to restoring trust and taking this company to new heights. With my appointment official, I immediately began working on initiatives to recover the company's reputation and stabilize the work environment. I restructured teams, implemented stricter ethics policies, and created a secure channel for employees to report issues without fear of retaliation. Miguel tried to maintain a presence at the company for a while, but his credibility was destroyed, and he ended up resigning a few months later. Julia, on the other hand, disappeared from the corporate scene and never tried to interfere with my path again. Today, looking back, I feel a mix of gratitude and satisfaction. Gratitude for those who believed in me when everything seemed lost, and satisfaction for having won in a just manner. Now, as president, I work every day to ensure that no one else goes through what I went through, so the company can thrive on solid values and mutual respect. If this experience taught me anything, it was that integrity and truth always find a way to prevail. Months passed since everything happened, and my life was finally stable. The company was prospering under my leadership, and the peace I had longed for had settled in. Júlia and Miguel had become a closed chapter. Or at least that's what I thought. I believed I would never hear from them again until, one day, I received a message from an ex-colleague. "Fernando, you won't believe what happened. Júlia and Miguel are in the middle of an even bigger scandal." Curious, I quickly replied asking for more details. That's when he told me Júlia's baby had been born, but a few months later, she decided to cheat on Miguel, and the situation became public. The most absurd part, she was now suing Miguel, demanding child support for the baby. When I heard this, I couldn't contain a loud, genuine laugh. It was almost unbelievable that the same woman who schemed so much to bring me down was now destroying her own accomplice. Her move was direct and ruthless. She used Miguel, just as she tried to use me, and in the end, he met the same fate she had planned for me: total discredit. It was a strange, but gratifying feeling. The revenge I didn't even need to plan turned out to be much sweeter than anything I could have imagined. Watching Júlia and Miguel destroy each other was, without a doubt, far more satisfying than the day Júlia was removed from the presidency. It was definitive proof that the universe has an ironic way of delivering justice. I laughed quite a bit that day. Afterward, I returned to work with a smile that didn't fade easily. After all, some battles are won just by watching from a distance.